Hi, it's V with Crafting Daily Dose, and today I have another alternative for the October 2022 paper pumpkin called Ho Ho Ho. This is a really fun personalized card that you can create using your favorite picture. Now previously I shared a different way to make a custom alternative, and if you missed that, the link is in the description box below. Basically, I followed the same layout as the original cards, but substituted out the Santa for a different face, and then created a new hat with some texture. This time we're taking that idea up a notch and creating a card that has the picture on an ornament, and you can remove the ornament to be able to hang it up. Now stick around and I'll show you how it's done. Here are the pieces that we're going to be using for the card. The card base is basic white thick cardstock and it's in landscape orientation. So it's 5.5 inches across, 8.5 inches in height, scored down the middle at 4.25 inches. This piece of basic white cardstock is going to be for the front panel. It's 5.5 inches across by 3 inches in height. And then I have another piece of basic white cardstock that's going to be for the back of the ornament. It's 2 inches across by 2 inches in height, but that doesn't have to be exact, as long as it fits the circle, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now this is a piece of cherry cobbler cardstock that is approximately 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. This doesn't have to be exact either, it just needs to fit the Santa hat image. Now in the other alternatives that I showed you, I colored in the hat using my blends markers, which are alcohol based. They're beautiful, but they do bleed to the other side. Now if this ornament happens to spin around, we would see the back of the hat, so I didn't want any bleeding to show through. That's why I'm using a different method to create the hat this time. We're going to do some paper piecing, which means that we're going to stamp the hat onto our cherry cobbler cardstock, and then we're going to stamp the brim and the pom-pom onto something different. Now, if you'd like, you can use basic white cardstock, but I'm going to be using some of this leftover from the iridescent sheets that the snowflakes came from. So we'll be making good use of those extra areas. Now, I've got 2 strips here that have been cut from one of the envelopes. Each one is 5.5 inches across by 1 inch in height. They were cut from one of these envelopes, and so what I did was I trimmed off a tiny sliver from each of the sides, and then I was able to open it up. And so you can see that we've got the pattern all in this area, as well as on this panel too. And with the size that we're using, you're going to be able to get 4 strips from this part of the envelope. Now here's another leftover from the kit that we'll be using. This is the die cut sheet that's already had the letters punched out. We're going to be using these as stencils along with some sticky notes, or you can use strips of masking paper in place of the sticky notes. I've got some of the in color baker's twine here, and I'm going to cut 10 inches. Next, we need a photograph for the ornament, and I'm not a pet parent myself, but some friends shared pictures of their cute dogs. Now you can use pets or kids or your partner or yourself. You just need to be able to have a face or faces that's going to fit inside the circle. So what I did here was I took the photographs and I collaged them so that I can make just one print. I did this using the Photo Life app, but there are lots of other apps and websites that you can use. Basically, each of these squares is about 2 inches by 2 inches, and I cropped the pictures so that the face would be taking up about half of that square. So each face is about 1 inch or so. By doing this, I can print out just one picture and get 6 usable images. What I'm using to get that round ornament shape is the layering circle dies. Now, this set has some scallop circles as well as some plain ones, and here I'm using the 3rd smallest of the plain ones. So 1, 2, 3. It's this one right here, which is approximately 1 5/8 of an inch in diameter. So I'm using that to cut out the photograph, and I'm also using that to cut out this cardstock piece that's going to be for the backing. In order to make that backing more durable and easier to remove from the card, I'm going to cover it up with some packing tape before I die cut it out. You could use your take your pick tool or something else pointy to create the hole to hang your ornament. But I have this hole punch that creates a very tiny hole. That's what I'll be using, but of course that's optional. Now for ink colors, I'm going to be blending in some cherry cobbler ink using a sponge dauber, and then I will be stamping with the shaded spruce. My sentiment is going to be using Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and if you're stamping the brim and the pom-pom of your hat using cardstock, then you'll use this for that as well. But if you're going to be stamping that onto this non-porous iridescent paper, then you'll want to use StazOn ink instead. And now we're all set to get started. I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black ink to stamp just the Santa hat part of the image onto my cherry cobbler cardstock. I've got my silicone craft mat underneath because I like to have some cushion under my paper when I'm using clear photopolymer stamps. And now I'll switch to StazOn ink for my iridescent paper. A little corner of the brim got cut off there, so I'll try it again. StazOn ink will tend to stain your stamps a little bit, but it's not going to affect how well they work. You can clean it off with StazOn cleaner, but I just leave mine alone for the most part. Any ink that's on my silicone mat can be wiped off with some rubbing alcohol. Next, I'll stamp the inside of my card base using shaded spruce ink. And I want some of my stars to be lighter, so I'll stamp again without re-inking in between, but I'll turn the stamp so that I get a little bit more variety in the image. I'd like some more sets of lighter stars, so I'm going to get some scrap paper and stamp off onto that first. While I have that stamp still mounted, I'll go ahead and do the same thing to the front panel. Next, I'll lightly draw in some guidelines. I'll use a ruler, but you can also use the squares on your grid paper and just line them up with a straight edge, or use your trimmer for the measurements so you can draw in your guidelines. So I'm going to go 1/2 of an inch from the side edge on both sides. I want 3/4 of an inch from the top and 1/2 inch from the bottom. I'm drawing these in lightly so that I can erase them later, but I'll have to be careful not to get ink on top of the lines because if they're covered with ink, they won't be able to be erased. First, I'm going to line up my letter J. The top is going to go just underneath this line, and then the side is going to go just to the right of this one. So first, I'm going to start where I can see both of those guidelines. I'll hold it closer so you can see better. So right now I can see this guideline here and this one over on the left. Once I know that I'm close, I'm going to scoot this down and to the right a little bit until those guidelines just disappear out of sight. I'm going to take some washi tape and hold that down in place. I've got some sticky notes and you can tell that I've used them already. I'm going to cover up the adjacent areas. Since everything is so close, I don't want to accidentally get ink into one of those other spaces. If you've got masking paper, you can use strips of that instead of the sticky notes. I'm tapping my sponge dauber onto the corner of my cherry cobbler ink pad. And I'm starting just outside of the letter here and making little swirls. I'm going to gradually move up and start filling in my letter. I can start lighter with less pressure and gradually layer on more color until I'm happy with how it looks. And when I'm done, I can go ahead and remove everything. Next, I'm ready to position my letter Y. So just as before, I'm going to place it so that I can still see those horizontal and vertical guidelines. And in this case, I'm going to scoot it down a little bit and then a little bit over to the left until those just go out of view. And I'll cover up my spaces again. Now when you're doing ink blending, it can get messy, so every once in a while, just stop and check your fingers. Make sure you clean off any stray ink so that it doesn't end up on your project. I have a little extra ink in this area where my stencil lifted up a little bit, so I'm going to try to erase what I can with my eraser. I'm using downstroke so that I don't end up smearing any of this ink upwards. And that got rid of most of it. Now the letter O is going to be covered up by the ornament, but I still want to use it because once the ornament is removed, I want there to be something in its place. So I'm going to center it horizontally as best as I can between the two letters we already have, and I'm going to lift it up so I can just barely see that guideline, and then bring it down just a hair until I can't see that guideline anymore. This time I'm going to put some scrap paper underneath those two so that any ink that's on there that's still fresh doesn't transfer to my project. And then we'll do the same thing with the stenciling. And finally, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. Now this is long and skinny, which means that you could bend it if you wanted to, but I want mine to be straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it face down onto my grid paper and just kind of let it fall and assume its natural shape. And because it's a longer sentiment, I'm going to mount it diagonally onto my block so that it will fit. So right now the smooth surface is on top. I'm going to press my block onto it, and then it will transfer once I pick it up. I'm going to ink this up in Memento Tuxedo black ink, and then I'll stamp just above my guideline. Once I'm sure that all my ink is dry, I'll erase my pencil marks. And I've got a link to the eraser that I'm using in the description box. In order to make my ornament, I'm going to use my die to cut out the face as well as the backing. To make the backing more durable, as well as to make it easier to remove from the card, I am going to back it with some packing tape. So to do that, I'm just going to tear off a piece of packing tape. And then I will cover this up. And I'm going to die cut right through that. Here's what my pieces look like after I've cut them out. And you can see that the backing piece is nice and smooth and glossy now because it's been covered by the packing tape. I'm going to flip it over to the other side, just the plain cardstock side, and I'll put glue on that. And I'll glue it to the picture. Next, I'm going to fussy cut out the hat and the individual pieces. Notice that I'm not moving the scissors very much. I'm keeping them pretty still and mostly just moving the paper around. Now I'll glue the brim and the little pom-pom to the hat. Then I'll put some glue on the picture and stick the hat on. Once the glue has set up, I can punch a hole in the hat. Now for my twine. I'm going to go ahead and thread it through. And then pull it so that the two ends meet up. Then I'm going to wrap it around my finger, down here close to the base, and pull my ends through that loop, and then I have a little hack for getting that knot to stay where I want it to go. I'm taking the pointy end of my Take Your Pick tool and I'm going to put it into that loop and kind of hold it down in place as I pull the ends and tighten the twine around it. That's just going to help guide my knot where I want it to be. And then I'll finish tightening it up. Then up here towards the top, I'm going to tie another knot. So now you have a hanging loop. Next, let's assemble the card. I like to flip it open and make sure that I've got it right side up. So this is going to be my front. I'm making sure to reinforce that with my bone folder, and then I'll glue on those two strips cut from the envelope. They're big enough so that you can adhere them flush with the top and bottom edges of the card, but I like leaving just a little gap. Next, I'll put some dimensionals on the back of the front panel. After I take off the backings, then I'll center this over my card, and note that there is going to be some overlap with the envelope strips. Now I'll put a mini glue dot in the middle of the O. And then the ornament is going to stick on top of that. You can leave the twine loose or you can tuck it in underneath this panel. You can use your bone folder to gently tuck it in further. If one glue dot is not enough to hold your ornament, you can add one or two more. Here's our finished card. We've got some simple stamping for the inside with plenty of room for your holiday greeting. And then on the front, it's personalized with your own favorite photo, and we've added some extra glitz using that iridescent paper for the brim of the hat. Of course, your recipient is going to love the picture so much that they're going to want to hang it up, and you have already provided a little hanging loop, and this is detachable. Because we've coated the back here with that packing tape, it can come off from the glue dot without any damage. and it's ready to hang up on their tree. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this dose of creativity. If you're interested in Paper Pumpkin but don't have a demonstrator yet, you can find the subscription link as well as all of my other links in the description box below. If you make this project, I would love to see it, so share it in my Facebook group or tag me if you're sharing elsewhere. I look forward to crafting with you again next time, and until then, have a great day.